Okay, so we're now continuing with chapter 2 from a prophet today about Joshua, Yehoshua. And just a short recap, the previous chapter was about the reconnaissance mission that Joshua has sent spies into Jericho to determine whether the land was conquerable or not. He sent, our tradition is that it was Pinchas and Caleb that he sent, and that their purpose of going was not the normal spying way to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the physical structure of Jericho, but to see if the people of Jericho could compromise the power and the strength that the Jews had developed in the Midbar before entering the Canaanite world, because it wasn't the land of Israel yet, it was Canaan. And it was filled with avodah zarah and all kinds of improper behavior. The result of the visit to Jericho, to the harlot Rachav, was that she became Baalei Tshuva, and they were not compromised, and it was clear to Joshua when they came back with a report that the people of Jericho were dispirited and it could be conquered. And that's where we left off last week, and this week we begin with the invasion itself. Israel's miraculous crossing of the Jordan River is joyously extolled every time we recite Hallel. And I think we all know this phrase in translation. The sea saw and fled, the Jordan turned backward. It's from Tehillim, it's from Hallel itself, the 114th Psalm, verse 3. Although Rashi and the Ibn Ezra, there's a question here, what is this a reference to? Right? Because most of Hallel, as you know, is not about the entrance into the land of Israel. It's about leaving Egypt, the miracles of leaving Egypt. That's really what it's about. So the question is, what is this reference to the Jordan here? One should remember, as we move closer to Purim and then Pesach, that we'll come to this again, but part of the nature of Pesach is we have how many glasses of wine on Pesach?
4.
4 glasses, right. But there's a 5th glass on the table, right?
Elijah.
Right. So we understand that there were 4 levels of enslavement and 4 levels of relief from the enslavement, right? That they would be relieved from the enslavement, that the pressures would be taken off them, that they would be brought out of the land, that they would receive Torah, and that they would enter the land of Israel that had been promised to their fathers, right? The first 4 happened very quickly, within a year, basically. The last one took 38 years, 39 years to accomplish. So there was an argument when the tradition of the Seder was being created as to how many glasses of wine we should have. And as we should have 4 representing those 4 levels that happen quickly. Rabbi Tarfon held, no, we should have a 5th glass because it's part of that process. In the end, the Chazal, the wise people, the wise rabbis of Bavel, decided that Eliyahu, Teku, which is an expression meaning that Eliyahu will come and resolve this question. It's a phrase used in the Talmud when you can't resolve a question. That Eliyahu comes in advance of Mashiach, as the herald of Mashiach, and he does many things. One of them is answer all the things that we couldn't solve in the Talmud. Right? So this question is it a 4th cup or a 5th cup? Should we drink it? We leave it on the table. We don't drink it. And we call it the Kos Shel Eliyahu because Eliyahu is the one who will tell us whether we should drink it or not. Now, some of us might argue, since he's coming to herald Mashiach, right, at a time when we should inhabit the land, my guess is he'll say it should be 5 cups. But that's for others to know rather than for me. All of this revolves around Hallel because we're singing Hallel during this time as well. We sing Hallel at the Seder table, and we sing this particular one as well. So is this a reference to something that happened when we left Mitzrayim, or is this a reference to the 5th cup, in a way, when we entered Israel? This was an argument between Rashi and the Ibn Ezra, right? Rashi and the Ibn Ezra note here that this refers to the splitting of all waters in the world, including the Jordan, as part of the miracle of the Red Sea. There's a concept that not just the Red Sea split on that day, right? That all waters in the world split. So if you were a Native American having a warm cup of water on the Dakota Plains at that moment, right, the water in your vessel would have split into two parts, right? The Great Lakes would have split into two parts. Niagara Falls would have split into two parts. Every body of water would have split at that time. Now we understand that these miracles that happened, right, were known around the world at a time before the internet, at a time before fax machines. So perhaps, this was part of it. There was when the Jews received Torah, there was a sense that something great was happening all over the world, and people asked the evil prophet Bilam, right, is God about to destroy the world again? Because the world was shaking at the time that the Torah was given. And Bilam told the people, he said, no, this is not the flood, this is not the end of the world, this is God is giving the Torah to his children at this point. So it seems that there were reverberations all over the world of what happened in Yetzias Mitzrayim, and Rashi and the Ibn Ezra argue that this reference to the Jordan turned backward, right, is just a reference to another body of water that split at this moment when the Jews left.
And time-wise, it would be 40 years later. It's not. It's
but the question, but this comes back to the point I was making before: is Hallel limited to the leaving of Egypt? Or is Hallel really intended to represent all 5 stages of redemption, which includes entering the land? Right? And this comes back to the 5th cup. That's why I raised it. Right? So this is a discussion among the Rishonim. Right? Although Rashi and the Ibn Ezra note here that this refers to the splitting of all waters of the world, including the Yarden, as part of the miracle of the Red Sea. The Radak and the Malbim disagree and explicitly relate this phrase to the splitting of the Jordan River during Yehoshua's time. Here too, like the Red Sea, a miracle took place. On the 10th of Nisan, 4 days before Pesach, right, the river split, and the Jewish people walked past a column of water on dry land and entered the land of Israel. Right? Have you ever been to Israel? Okay. So when you see the Jordan River, it may not be exactly what you expect it to be. Right? It's not the Mississippi at all. It's a relatively small body of water, and in some places very small,
Fresh Lakish, it just jumped from one thing to another.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's so big.
What exactly happened? What is the difference between the splitting of the Red Sea and the splitting of the Jordan? And perhaps the greater interest, why did the Jewish people have to enter Israel in such a grand fashion? So, first of all, one of the questions here is, splitting the Red Sea was a very big deal, right? For instance, what was the situation, right? Behind us are the Egyptians who are going to either take us to slavery or kill us, right? In front of us is a sea that will kill us and will drown, right? So this was a life and death situation. With the Jordan, right? With the Jordan, it's a different situation, right? With the Jordan, they didn't actually have to cross it. They could have kept living where they were living on the East Bank if they wanted to, right? So when they were going to cross it, that was kind of at their own pace, number one. Number two, you're not dealing with a very deep sea. You're dealing with a relatively small river, at times almost a stream. Right, so you could cross it certainly in pontoon bridges, on rafts, stuff like that. It didn't require so much drama. So the question is, why have all this drama? We'll get to the answer. It says, why did they not simply cross via a ferry or pontoon bridge? Why not simply wade across? After all, the Jordan River is one of the least impressive bodies of water in the world, resembling a creek more than a river. There's a note here that Henry Kissinger was brought to the Jordan River, right, as part of his tour of Israel. Right? It says, when he first viewed the Jordan River, Henry Kissinger allegedly exclaimed, "This is it?"
You will not believe.
It shows what can be accomplished with good public relations, said Henry Kissinger, right? That the Jordan is so grand in people's minds, that it plays a big role in many faiths, right? He said, Kissinger's reaction was, this is what can be accomplished with good public relations. It's not such a big deal. Right?
And the same with Kinneret.
Yeah, exactly.
You think Kinneret, it's big, it's just small.
No, it's very small. You can literally, it's very small.
Which, the Jordan?
Kinneret.
Yeah, also the
Especially
Jordan. You remember we were
for
rafting on the Jordan. You remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. Certainly, the miracles of the Red Sea. Yeah, for Canadians, this is very difficult. There are more lakes. I read this today. Did you send them or somebody sent them? There are more lakes in Canada than anywhere else in the world combined. Like Canada, it seems to be the source of water, fresh water. Certainly, the miracle of the Red Sea is much more famous than that of the crossing of the Jordan. Not only was the Red Sea more difficult to traverse, but the miracle also enabled the Jews to escape certain death at the hands of the Mitzrayim. Why was it necessary, so to speak, for Hashem to repeat this miracle for the generation of Jews? Other questions emerge from the verses. Here's a question. Yehoshua rose early in the morning, and they traveled from Shittim and came to the Jordan. Remember, Shittim is where the spies left from, right, and where the experience with the Midianite women happened, and where the plague that killed 24,000 happened, right? So they went from Shittim and they came to the Jordan. This is from chapter 3, verse 1, from Yehoshua. He and the children of Israel, and they lodged there before they crossed. So it seems that there wasn't a big rush, right? They weren't rushing across. They came, they stayed. They were looking across, right? And remember, they weren't actually looking across planning the battle. That had already been decided before they left Shittim, right, when the spies came back. Right? Why was it necessary to state that they lodged there before crossing? What is the relevance to the events at hand? Now, as I read this, which is also from Joshua, the translation, it's the next 4 verses from chapter 3. There should be a ring of something familiar to you, like you've heard it before. Okay? It was at the end of 3 days that the officers circulated in the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of God and the Kohanim, the Levites, carrying it, then you shall move from your place and follow it. But there shall be a distance between yourselves and it, a measure of 2,000 cubits. Do not approach any closer to it, so that you may know the way in which you should go. For you have not passed this way yesterday or the day before. Yehoshua said to the people, prepare yourself, for tomorrow God will do wonders in your midst. Yehoshua then spoke to the Kohanim. Carry the Aaron, the Ark of the Covenant, and pass before the people, so they carried the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. Right. Now, does this sound like preparation for anything else that we've thought of before? No? What was prepared for 3 days before?
Receiving of the Torah.
That's right. Receiving the Torah, right?
But nobody was carrying anything anywhere.
Very good point. It's not exactly the same, right? Mm-hmm. But there's certainly a lot of similarities here, right? Preparation of it, right? Mm-hmm. There are going to be miracles done in your midst, mm-hmm. right, etc. Several parallels connect the passage with the revelation at Har Sinai. Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, admonished him to appoint a council to assist him in the governance. Remember, he was concerned that the people were lined up all day and night. He was standing all day and night. They were standing all day and night for judgment. And Yitro said to Moshe, this is not the way to have judgment. You should be dealing with very, very complex issues of judgments that have no precedent. Much lower courts can deal with simpler issues. And so Yithro suggested, and Moshe agreed with him, that they would have different sets of courts of 10, courts of 100, courts of 50, courts of thousands and 10,000s, right? In the end, there were 72,000 judges, was the number that they had for Israel. Almost everybody seemed to have their own judge at a certain point. So that's what Yithro had said, and so Moshe could focus on imparting to the people the way in which they should go. That's what he said. If you spend all your time dealing with things like trespassing or lashon hara or small arguments of money between individuals as opposed to lower courts, you'll never get to direct them in the big picture, the way in which they should go. Moshe commanded the people as a prelude to the revelation, let them prepare on the third day to sanctify themselves appropriately. And in both places, the anticipated events occurred after 3 days. It was a 3-day wait. Additionally, Yehoshua curiously instructed the Kohanim to carry the Aron, which was your point, that this was not part of what Moshe did, to carry the Aron HaKodesh, and not the Levites. Right? He says the Kohanim who are Levites, right? The Kohanim are part of the tribe of Levi, right? But it's the Kohanim are responsible for wrapping the vessels, right? But not for carrying them. That was the responsibility of the Levites, right? They're cousins in a way. They were responsible for unwrapping it and doing the avoda, right? But the actual physical carrying was the responsibility of the Leviim. Right? Here it says the Kohanim who are Leviim, because they're part of the same tribe,
but
right?
they didn't carry
will carry it.
They didn't carry them. The Aaron was carrying them.
But this is all the vessels, not just the Aaron. But in this case, you're right. The
Rashi mentioned.
You're right. We understand there's an idea that the Aaron was really carrying the Leviim, right, or whoever the carriers were. What? In either case, right? That normally it was the Leviim who carried it, not the Kohanim. Right? So the question asked, why now do we say the Kohanim? Right. Additionally, Yehoshua curiously instructed the Kohanim to carry the Aron Kodesh and not the Levites, whose task it was in the wilderness to carry the sacred objects of the Mishkan, including the Aron Kodesh, all of the vessels. Why did Yehoshua change the procedure? The Gemara Sota elaborates on this point. Right? How did Israel cross the Jordan? During the wilderness years, the ark traveled behind 2 tribal banners. If you look and see the way the tribe set up, always the Aaron was in the center, right? And there were 2 circles, concentric circles around, or 2 concentric squares around the Aaron. First was the Aaron, then were the Levites on all 4 sides, or on 3 sides, and the opening where Moshe and Aaron camped on the east side, right? And then there was another set in which there were 4 groups of 3 tribes on each side, right? So there was 3 tribes here, on the north, on the south, on the east, and the west, right? When they traveled, there's a discussion as to how they traveled. Did they travel in such a way that the Aaron was in the middle? Many hold that the Aaron was the third after 2 leading tribes, and then the Aaron, and then the rest of the nations, right? But in this case, right, they're told, pass the Aaron in front of the people and take the lead, right? So this is a question, right? It said, how did Israel cross the Jordan? During the wilderness years, the ark traveled behind 2 tribal banners, but on this day it traveled in front. So in a sense, it was unprotected, right? Normally, the king very often would not be in the front of the army. The troops would be before him, and then he would be in the middle, and then more troops after him. As it says, behold the Ark of the Covenant. The Master of the whole earth is passing before you in the Jordan. This is from Yehoshua. During the wilderness years, the Levites carried the Ark, but on this day the Kohanim carried it. And this was one of 3 times the Kohanim carried the Ark instead of the Levites. Anybody want to guess what the other 2 were? There's only 3 times in which the Kohanim carried the Ark.
Maybe one when they brought it from Plishtim back to Jerusalem.
Very good. That's one of them.
And the third one.
So when it was brought to the temple of Shlomo,
when Shlomo was the first.
When Shlomo brought it into the temple, it was carried by the Kohanim, right? Right. Temple of David and Shlomo. Anybody else want to guess the other one? I'll give you a hint which will give it away. It's actually part of the story we're reading right now. It's in this book.
It's a second time?
No, we're reading this. There's a third time that's part of this book. You want to guess?
What is the second time?
What? The first time was Shlomo, right? Or the first one discussed with Shlomo. The second time, we've already said, was carrying it across the Yarden. Right? There's one more time, and it happens in this book itself. Anybody want to guess what that time was?
Shalom.
What's the song? Right.
Crossing the Jordan?
Joshua fit the battle of Jericho and came tumbling down. Right. When they circled the walls, they circled it with the Aaron in the front of them. Right. So that's the other time. Right. Okay.
And Kohanim was carrying it, not Levim.
Yes. In each time, that's right. That's correct. Right. Apparently, this was done with forethought. So what message was Yeshua sending to the Kohanim by having them carry the ark, or sending to the nation and the world? And so the story continues. Now we're not talking about Sota. We're back to Yehoshua, right? God said to Yehoshua. Right, now remember the situation. You have to think for a second, right? They're coming out of the desert. They've had very significant military victories, but under whose guidance? Moshe, right? Now they don't have Moshe, they don't have Aaron, they don't have Miriam. The old guard has passed on. And they're about to confront the army that terrified their fathers and grandfathers. So much so that they didn't want to fight the battle. Right? And they're doing it under the leadership of not a new person. You know, Yehoshua was known and clearly selected by Moshe, right, and by God for to lead them across the thing. But in some ways, this is his first major venture.
Independent.
You know, and we know that Moshe's first major venture didn't work out quite very well. His first major venture, we're dealing with the second stages of it right now in the Torah, which is getting Paro to let the Jews leave. But in his first effort, he was literally chased out of Egypt by his own people and complained to God. Right? So now Joshua must have thought back and said, you know, the first test that Moshe had, it was very hard. Right? What's for me? I'm going to go up against this huge walled city, you know, ancient, powerful walled city. Right? What will happen to me? Right? So God understood that this test was one that was required to establish Joshua's position in the world and especially with his own people. God said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all of Israel, and that they may know that just as I was with Moshe Rabbeinu, so I will be with you. You shall command the Kohanim, the bearers of the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters, the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan." Right? There they were with the Ark itself. They were told, you have to walk into the water of the Jordan, carrying the Ark. Yehoshua said to the children of Israel, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." And Yehoshua said, "Through this you will know that the living God is in your midst, and he will surely drive away before you," talking about the 7 Canaanite nations. "Behold, the Ark of the Covenant is passing before you in the Jordan. And now take for yourselves 12 men, one from each of your tribes of Israel. And it shall be that as the soles of the feet of the Kohanim, bearers of the Ark of God, rest in the waters of Jordan, the waters of the Jordan will be cut off, the waters that descend from upstream, and they will stand in one column." So Yehoshua is predicting a miracle, right? He's saying, I didn't
understand. They will upstream, they will just stop and stand there?
Right, so we're going to come to this. That's right. He's saying that, because unlike a sea, how does a river work? Water comes from here to there, right? Flows from upstream to downstream, right? So in order for the river to be dry, How do people do it?
Dams.
They create a dam, right? So they put a block in, right? The water, build a high wall, right? And the water stays there. And the water over here, disappears, right? It just flows downstream. This is what happened with the Aswan Dam, right? In Egypt. Or all the great dams, right? They control how much water will come out. Maybe no water will come out. Maybe a little bit will come out. It's a way of controlling floods. It's a way of irrigating many things, right? So what Joshua said is miraculously the upstream waters will be prevented and the downstream waters will disappear and the land will be dry and we'll walk through, right?
Did anybody ever say that it was a dam created very fast? Somebody blew something.
I never heard that. I never heard that. But what we're learning here, in a way what we're learning here is that this miracle seems to not have been required in order for the conquest of the land. But it was more required that the people should know that Joshua had inherited this role of leadership, not because he was got the best score in the test or because he was the person who took care of Moshe Rabbeinu whenever he needed something. Maybe all that was true. But because he was selected by God as the leader of the Jewish people, and this is a sign of it, that this will happen, that he could tell his own people, these are the things that will happen. Right? So much so that I'm willing to risk the Kohanim walking into the water with the ark itself. This was a quite remarkable statement if you think about it for a second. Again, so he told them exactly what's going to happen. Predicted. This way. Now notice he doesn't use the phrase a wall of water. Right? Because we know that when the Jews crossed the Sea of Reeds, called the Red Sea but incorrectly, that it's described as walls of water standing on either side of them, and they walked through those walls when the Egyptians entered into that, and they walked on dry land, and when the Egyptians entered into it, the walls collapsed on them after the Jews walked. A very dramatic kind of thing. Here we're not talking about walls. We're talking about a column of water. We've heard this expression column in other places. Column of fire, column of smoke, right? But it's not a wall, right? It's quite different here. Again, in Sota, underscores this point, right, in the Gemara, right? As soon as the Kohanim dipped their feet into the Yarden, the waters flowed backwards and stood in one column at a height of 12 mil. Corresponding
12 mil.
A mil is about 2.5 kilometers. It's very
like
high.
A mile you're talking
It's a very
about?
big column. Yeah.
Oh, mil is
it's
like
a little bit
mile.
over a mile. It's a bit over a mile. Right. 12 mil by 12 mil. That was the height of the height and size of the column, right? And it corresponded to the dimensions. It was a hint to the dimensions of the camp of Israel. That's a description of the camp of Israel, that it was 12 mil by 12 mil.
When you say mil, it's like mile.
Yeah, it's about a mile and a half. It's not a mile. It's a biblical measurement.
Mil?
Right.
It's a
M-I-L, yeah. I think it's
mil.
2,000 amos makes up a mil.
2,000 amos.
Yeah, it's roughly...
Amma is this?
It's roughly... no, amma is to here. Right? Yeah. It's roughly a mile and a half. Is what it is, right? So it's a very high tower of water that went up. Right.
Thank you.
No.
Would you like some more?
So, so this tower, right, was, 18 miles high, in a sense, right? Is what we're saying. Right. The water which here stood in one column was in contrast to the Red Sea, where the water formed two walls on opposite sides of the people as they crossed. Indeed, the water descending from upstream stood still, and they rose up into a column. So it's as though there was like an invisible wall that created a dam. Right? That's really what happened, right? The water continued to flow into this invisible wall, and instead of going past it, it just went higher and higher and higher and higher and higher.
They
right?
redirected river into the sky?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was a column standing in the sky.
It was spinning like...
There's no reference to spinning.
I can't even... Can you imagine? There is...
Imagine this, right? Imagine a very tall skyscraper that instead of being a skyscraper is all glass, and on one side has an entrance for water. And it's like a beaker filling it. It's like this, right? Right?
But this
Down here is the Jordan, right? Down here is the Jordan, and it continues to fill up infinitely high, right? Mm-hmm. As long as is required for the Jews to cross. This tower goes higher and higher and higher and higher, right? And no water goes past it. It just continues to climb higher. Got it?
Yeah, it's like
okay.
a Artesian...
It's actually like a dam.
Yeah, but the fountain going down.
It's like a dam.
But fountain goes
but it's like a dam with a glass wall, in a sense. You can see it, right? And as the water accumulates, the glass wall keeps getting higher and higher and higher.
Is Joshua considered it's a prophetic? What is it? Or it's a it's a historical?
Yehoshua is a prophet, and he told the people this is what would happen, right? Remember what he said, right? He said. Rest in the waters of Jordan. The waters of Jordan will be cut off. The waters that descend from upstream, they will stand in one column. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what he told them. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. That column eventually got to be 18 miles high. It's very high. It dropped. Right? Hang on. Okay. The water that descended from... Okay, so this is a difference between... They're pointing out the difference in the miracles, right? In both cases, these miracles were done so that the Jews could cross over dry land. It's much easier to cross dry land than it is to do it in boats and pontoons, etc. Right? So somehow this was done so that they could cross in a miraculous way. And we understand before this happened, God said, I'm doing this, right, so that the people will understand that you are standing in Moshe's place now, that I am with you as well. Right? So it stood and rose up in one column. The water that descended from the sea of the plain to the Dead Sea ceased and was cut off, and the people crossed opposite. So the water downstream just departed. It wasn't like there was a tower on either side, right? The water downstream, and which meant that it's like a sink. It just ran out basically, right? And even though the waters flowing from the north stopped, the waters did not overflow the banks when it was released, right? It didn't overflow the banks behind it, right? Because in theory, when you create a dam, most people create a lake when they create a dam. It's the effect of it. Yeah. The Grand Coulee Dam created, I have to think, one of the largest lakes, I think, in Utah or Arizona, actually. But very often dams create lakes. That's part of what they do, actually, to store water, right? In this case, it didn't happen, because instead of the water overflowing the banks, it just kept going straight up into the sky, right? And even though the waters flowing from the north stopped, the waters did not overflow the banks of the Jordan. At the Red Sea, the very nature of water changed. This is important. As it stood in two walls, and dry land materialized between these walls. At the Jordan, the water remained in its original form. That is to say, what the author is saying here is that at the Red Sea, the waters actually took on a quality of hardness, of solidness, like walls, as they went through. This is part of the miracle of it. Right. Here, the water was very recognizably water that was being stored in this tower as we went forward. Right?
Like different aggregate masses. Yeah. But it's bizarre to say, it didn't change its nature. It just went against the gravity. It's like nothing.
No, what I'm saying is it remained watery. Right? It remained watery. It didn't seem... That is to say, if the water had turned into something solid, right? So you built a solid tower, one brick on top of another, right, from the water, that would have been much more understandable, right? When the water that the Jews passed through in the Sea of Reeds, right, it took on the quality of a hardness. The nature of the water changed itself, as you said, like ice, right? I'm not sure that I would say that it was ice because it wasn't particularly cold, but the impact of it was similar to that, right? Mm-hmm. There was a hardness to it. They weren't being sprayed with water as they walked through, right? Mm-hmm. Here, the water was there. It was very clear. It was bubbling and just going up and up and up. We do have similar things to this in our own lives. When the sink overflows, right? If the sink were higher, it wouldn't overflow. You could turn the water on and let it run almost forever if your sink was, 12, 18 miles high. Right? That's what we're saying happened here. Right? It would still be watery the whole time. Right? At the Yarden, the water remained in its original form. The miracle was in the cessation of its flow, after which the dry ground emerged naturally. In that sense, the crossing of the Jordan necessitated a smaller nace, a smaller miracle than the crossing of the Red Sea, for reasons which will shortly become clear. There was a reason why it was a diminished miracle, but still a miracle. Right?
I don't find it very diminished. I find it bizarre the river went into the sky.
I think compared to the timing of the Sea of Reeds,
timing
of the Yam Suf,
wasn't set.
No, it was set. We were told when it was going to happen, right? Uh-huh. But what I'm saying is the pressure at the Yam Suf was, if this doesn't happen, the whole nation is dead, right? At the Yarden, if it happens tomorrow, so okay, we'll do it tomorrow. If it happens the next day, we'll do it tomorrow, right? We don't have anybody on our back saying, we're going to attack you, wild animals, a sea, an army, right? They're camped over there, right? They came, they camped, they set up, right? When it's time to go, we go, right? Whereas, remember what the Yidden said to Moshe at the sea. They saw Paro's elite forces bearing down on them with chariots, and they said to Moshe, "What? There were no graves in Egypt? That we had to come here to die? There's a shortage of caskets? What's going on?" Right? That was the reaction to the situation. We don't have a sense of that with Yehoshua because there was no enemy coming down upon them at that moment. Right? The memorial of the stones. The Kohanim stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Yarden, and all Israel crossed on dry land until the entire nation finished crossing the Yarden. After they crossed, Yehoshua commanded the previously designated 12 men, one from each tribe, to each take a stone from the river and bring it to their lodging place for the night in Gilgal and set it there. So they were each supposed to take a big stone from the river bed, right, because it's a dry river bed at that point, and bring it there. Yehoshua, the Sefer Yehoshua tells us, "So this will be a sign in your midst. When your children ask tomorrow, saying, 'What are these stones to you?' And you shall," now remember that phrase? We hear this phrase during the Haggadah. What does this mean to you? Right? "What do these stones mean to you?" And you shall tell them that the waters of the Yarden were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem when it crossed the Jordan. The waters of the Yarden were cut off, and these stones shall be remembrance for the children of Israel forever. Right? So this is a way of, it's clear that Hashem understands that we are a people who will say, "What have you done for me lately?" "Okay, you took me out of Egypt." "Okay, big deal, that happened in Jordan. What have you done for me lately?" So we have to be able to pass on in a way that is vibrant, in a way that's meaningful, in a way that we're touched by it ourselves. The Haggadah doesn't say, "Tell your child as though you were a slave in Egypt." It says, "Tell your child when you were a slave in Egypt." Right? That we should understand the power and the currency of it. That, today we live in a world of Haman. There's a nations bent on our destruction. Right? It's not an old story. The stories of the Torah, the stories of the Nach, are stories of today, as is Sefer Yehoshua. In addition, Yehoshua himself took 12 stones and set himself in the Jordan River as another and set them himself in the Jordan River as another monument to the miraculous crossing, saying, On that day Hashem exalted Yehoshua in the eyes of Israel, and they revered him as they had revered Moshe all the days of his life. That's what the Sefer says at that point. As soon as the Kohanim exited the river, the waters returned to their normal flow. So there are the Kohanim. It's an amazing image if you think about it for a second.
What about the rest of the nation?
They all passed before the Aron. The Kohanim entered the river, and the river stopped, right? With the Aron on their shoulders, right? On poles on their shoulders,
and while they're in the river.
And while they're there, every single member of
it was just men walking? It was the army walking? And
everybody. The whole nation crossed.
It wasn't military action when army walked in?
This is the whole nation crossing into what will be later called the land of Israel. Okay, this is the entrance into the land, right? Obviously, this is a great moment, right? And God wanted to make sure that this was embedded in our minds.
How come it's not? I first time hear it.
I don't know. But you have to have this image, right? The Aron itself, right? Something that will be hidden from the eyes of everybody once it's inside the Mishkan, right? Once it's inside the temple. It's not something people will see. Only the Kohen Gadol will see it, perhaps, on Yom Kippur, right? But at this moment, every Jew will see a demonstration, right? Now remember, the previous generation had seen the demonstration of Har Sinai. And these people had seen miraculous victories against great enemies in the desert, right? But now is another one of those miracles which is to embed in your minds that God himself is the controller of all things of nature. The Maharal of Prague points out that the very concept of nature is a very important thing to understand, that the very concept of nature God created as a veil of his own presence. What am I saying here? We use the expression laws of nature, right? Gravity. It's a law of nature. Centrifugal force. It's a law of nature. We know that, when I pick this up because of a law of nature, this pen drops, right? Okay. Law of nature, right? No, not a law of nature. Nature and the laws of nature are intended to veil the fact that when I drop that pen, God wanted that pen to go from there to there at that moment, right? It's hard for us to understand this because why does God care about me dropping a pen, right? But God did not set the laws of nature, quote, in place and then walk away from it. God actually has laws of nature acting millisecond by millisecond, nanosecond by nanosecond, in the way it is. We have an understanding of this, right? So that when God changes those laws and has the water stand up, right, we should try to understand that we're being deceived in our own minds by this phrase, the laws of nature, that, okay, now that the waters have returned to its gravitational norm, that the miracle is ended. No, it's not true, right? The miracle continues that if you have the observance and understand that the laws of nature are simply a veil for the actions of God, right? That is to say, the table that we're all resting on right now, right? This feels, pretty solid, right? But I think physicists will tell you, people of greater scientific knowledge than myself will explain to you that it's an appearance of solid, but really it's atoms working together, racing around. All these loose atoms are bound together to give us a table-like quality, right? That this can fall apart. And by the way, we know if I take this table outside and I put it outside in the weather, right, over time it will disintegrate and become part of nature again, and a tree will grow out of it someday, right? It'll take a long time. But that whole process is something that is entirely controlled moment by moment by God. And the moment that God were to say no more, right, we would descend back to Tohu Vavohu, right? In Tehillim it says, right, the guardian of Israel neither, anybody know? Slumbers nor sleeps. Right? We need sleep. We need to rest, right? But if God really takes a break, I'm not talking about the break of Shabbos where God ceased creating. He didn't let the world fall apart. But if he were to do what we do in our sleep, right, then the world would disintegrate completely into Tohu Vavohu, what it was originally, right? So these acts right, are intended to impress. But if we really have a deep understanding of this, we understand that the acts that go on normally, that the sun comes up, that a baby breathes, that grass grows, all have the same level of power. We just don't recognize it because it's what we think of as normal, in the process. And by the way, the moments that we suddenly do realize it are things like the birth of a child. How did that happen? It's like an amazing thing, right? Or we observe something in our own lives, an accident that we weren't part of. Something happened. We call these things miraculous. But, I have to tell you, today when my car started,
it was a miracle.
I thought this is for sure a nace, right? Yesterday, right, the car had trouble starting, right? And it was warmer. Today I thought, I wonder if it's going to start, right? And, I pushed the button, it started. I thought, okay, it's a miracle at this point. Because it was colder all night than it had been during the day.
In Hebrew, nature is teva. Teva is...
Speak a little bit louder. Yes! No, make your point. In Hebrew?
Teva, it's somebody who is drowning, it's tovea. So nature, it's like everything drowning into this water that nobody sees. Because in Hebrew nature, it's teva. The same as to drown. That's why you don't see. Now you never see. Everything
it means it's hidden.
Everything is underwater.
Absolutely. Yeah. That nature is a veil that God puts in front of us. One of the things is that we have to be in a situation where we make choices. After Adam Rishon, right, the world was created in a way in which we make choices. Right? If God is revealed to us clearly, we lose our ability to make choices. If you're standing in front of the king, it's very unlikely that you will, violate his law. But if the king is somewhere far away and you're in a hurry, so you jump a yellow light, right, because he's far away. You don't do it if there's a police car sitting on the intersection, right? If God reveals himself clearly to us, it is though there's a policeman sitting in the intersection, right? You don't make a choice at that point. There's no choice you can make, right? And this, by the way, is one of the descriptions when we hear at the giving of the Torah that God held the mountain over the head of the Jews and said, okay, if you accept it, well and good. And if not, I drop the mountain and you'll be buried here. Right? What does it mean, right? It doesn't really mean that he was holding physically the mountain over his head. No, it's saying that I have revealed myself to you. Right? Can you say no? Can an angel say no that recognizes me? Right? You can only say no to me if I'm veiled. Right? If I'm more distant from you. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. It means distance. That's actually what kadosh means, is separation, is distance. Right? It's a recognition of separation. At the same time, we recognize that God is always with us. It's a complicated process, right? But how exalted God is prevents us from ever disobeying his laws. So God says, I'm exalted, but I'm going to put you in a position where you will make choices, right? Make the right choices. I'm not going to make it so easy that it's so clear, right? You have to make the choices yourself at this point. And through that, you earn your keep, so to speak. Right? Okay, so let's move on a little bit further, and then we'll hold soon. So we read about Joshua took the stones himself, right? Hashem dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you crossed, as he did the Red Sea. He dried up before us until we crossed, so that all the peoples of the earth would know the hand of God, so that you would fear God all your days. Yehoshua is saying that this miracle was a miracle for everybody. But the first people it was a miracle for was their own people. Right? It was their Aaron. It was their leader. It was their God who was doing this. Would it instill fear when the reports came back to Jericho? For sure. For sure it would. But the people who had to know that God was in their midst was the ones about to fight this battle. Why were all these wonders necessary? Let's answer this question and then hold. Rashi states that when Yehoshua urged the people to draw near and hear the words of God, it means that he compressed them between the two staves of the Holy Ark, one of the places in Tanakh in which the small was able to contain the great. What does this mean? Why did they have to suddenly deviate from the routine of 40 years in which the Aron Kodesh traveled first, followed by Yehuda and Reuven? Why the Aron first, and why send it with the Kohanim? And why did the Ark have to travel 2,000 cubits in front of the people? Why does Yeshua use the expression, "With this you will know that the living God is in your midst"? This is the first time in Tanakh that such an expression is used. What does it mean, and why is it employed here? Let's hold here. Next week we're going to answer some of these questions, right?